The first time I said I was fat, I was 3 years old. 14 years later, I would go on to develop anorexia nervosa. My story of anorexia started like many others does. A history of bullying and disparaging comments made about my weight led to a health kick which spiraled out of control, until the foods I considered healthy I could count on one hand. Initially, my peer group respected my weight loss. They were asking me for tips on how they too could achieve my results. But what they didn't know was that with each pound I lost, my body dissatisfaction became worse and worse. I would spend hours staring in the mirror, completely dissatisfied with myself, seeing room for improvement, this funhouse mirror of fat rolls and cellulite, which just didn't exist. I didn't understand how the number on my clothes label could be lying to me, how the number on the scales could be lying to me. And so I pledged to more restriction, more punishment, and more purging. I passionately believe that you cannot overcome an eating disorder unless you yourself want to. Making promises for other people just to make them happy is just going to lead to relapse. I know in my own instance that I made a lot of promises. I promised to get better to my loved ones, and the thing is, I was very good at keeping my weight at a plateau, just above that of hospitalization, but just low enough that every single time someone told me I could do with putting on a few pounds, I would get that buzz of excitement. Funnily enough, it was coming to Oxford which really made the difference. Coming to Oxford, I realized maintaining an eating disorder and a serious academic career just wasn't compatible. It wasn't going to work. So I had to kick something to the curb, and luckily for me, it was my eating disorder. My love of psychology trumped that of anorexia. And I am proud. I am proud of what I've achieved in Oxford. I am proud of the fact that in the place where so many people fall apart, I put myself back together. But I digress. I think what I really want to talk to you all about today is that aspect of the fact that when I was losing weight, I perceived something very different. It looked like I was gaining weight. But the really strange thing happened when I started to gain it again, when I started to recover. It appeared to me that I was losing weight all over again. And that really confirmed to me that body image isn't what we think it is. It's not the reality that we are taught. Our reflection in the mirror is a construct or a misconstruct. It's neurological artifice. Nowadays, society has a really messed up view of itself anyway. I mean, for example, all it takes is someone to say they think that they're beautiful, and they're hounded by social media for being arrogant and vain rather than actually being self-confident or having high self-esteem. We're almost competitive with our flaws. But at what point does body dissatisfaction become clinical? At what point does body dissatisfaction become body dysmorphia? Body dysmorphia is an anxiety condition in which patients have a complete fixation on their subjective flaw. The importance of this condition cannot be overstressed, because to compensate for this fixation, patients will often self-mutilate or even commit suicide. But what I want to talk about today is that this isn't something that just affects clinical samples. This is something which should affect every single one of you in this room. Body dysmorphia is universal, and I'm going to show you how. I'm going to present to you 4 cases of body dysmorphia, which will really hammer home the point that everyone here should really sit up and take notice about this condition. So my first example of body dysmorphia is that which extends to my own story, and that's body dysmorphia in anorexia. This image makes me really sad, because a lot of people might think that it's over extreme or it's just even vanity of the anorexic to look in the mirror and say, I look fat, or they're just looking for a compliment. But honestly, I see that picture and I see 5 years of my life. But I do want to state that I don't pretend to have a universal or comprehensive. I'm not a comprehensive case of anorexia. I mean, anorexia is as unique as a fingerprint. It's as unique as a cobweb. There are some anorexics who are completely aware of their own emaciation, so much so that they'll wear baggy clothing to disguise it. But I think that the relationship between anorexia and body dysmorphia is a robust one. For example, 40% of people who have body dysmorphia will also have anorexia. As I have already stated, one thing I'm really passionate about is clearing up any misconceptions surrounding anorexia. And so what I want to really reiterate is that this is not vanity. This is hallucination. So powerful is this hallucination that it even affects the subconscious level. For example, if you take an anorexic patient and you ask them to walk through a sliding door, but measure the exact time at which the door slides close enough that they feel they have to rotate their shoulder, a subconscious movement, the anorexic will overcompensate by 40% of their width. 40% extra. That's what they honestly believe. That's the amount of space they honestly believe they're taking up. And you compare that to a control who'll only overcompensate by about 18% or so. It's pretty staggering. Now, there is a complete paucity of research with anorexia and body dysmorphia. It's really has to be addressed. Because speaking personally, one of the things which really hindered my recovery was knowing that what I was seeing was there was a huge disparity between that. The only thing that I can really believe in is my senses, right? So this huge disparity between that and then what everyone else was telling me. So the next example of body dysmorphia is actually the reverse of that. It's called muscle dysmorphia. And this is something that particularly affects men. And I wanted to include it because I honestly believe that there is a male mental health crisis in this country. The English stiff upper lip of propriety is asphyxiating. It means that our men are suffering in silence. And this is a prime case in point. It almost seems ridiculous, right? But this perception that men who are very, very large, particularly in the muscle building communities, weightlifting, bodybuilding, they have an honest perception that they're much smaller than they really are. And to compensate for that, they might use anabolic steroids or over-exercise, things which can be potentially lethal. So the next time you see someone in the gym who's posing in the mirror and really beefy and, you know, that guy, he might actually not be as happy as you think he is with himself. So maybe something to keep in mind. But it is important to note that bodybuilders and weightlifters report the highest levels of body dissatisfaction out of any sportsman. But I get that those two examples are still pretty, clinical. They're not you, or I would say I, but sorry, it is me. Definitely. But it is you too, and I'll tell you why. So I want to talk about how body dysmorphia affects every single person in this room. It's a universal condition. And I think we can all in some way relate to maybe losing a few pounds after Christmas especially. It's February, it's been a while, guys. Why aren't you doing anything? Anyway, I'm not judging. And what people don't consider when they're on their weight loss journey is how this might affect their psyche, how their psychological well-being can be completely compromised by weight loss. And actually, body dysmorphia is a key example of this. It seems that there's a weird inertia between a physical change, which the body does very quickly. I mean, crash diets, they work, but, that's a whole other story, a whole other TED talk. But then the brain can't compensate for these changes. The brain can't catch up fast enough. So what we see in the mirror is what we were before. Have you heard of when people talk about, I still see the fat person in the mirror? This like anecdotal evidence, it's called phantom fat, which is a really odd scientific name, apparently, but it's relating to phantom limb syndrome, the pain which comes after amputation, which is very odd, and it's a different phenomenon. But phantom fat is just a prime example of the fact that weight loss and body dysmorphia, rather, is just a construct of the brain. It's just what we see in the mirror is not a reflection of reality. It really is just what our brain can cobble together. Anyway, that's one example of how universally we all apply. We can all trigger body dysmorphia in ourselves. But also, just generally, everyone in this room has a degree of body dysmorphia just as a result of being human. We've evolved it. It made sense in a different era to have an over-exaggerated view of ourselves. So the sense proprioception, which means the sense of how much space we take up in the world, is exaggerated. It's larger than it is in reality. And that's to protect us from damage. It's to protect us from hurting ourselves. So it's good for the clumsier people in the room. It's great. But it's not so great when we live in a society which values taking up as little space as possible. Then we have a real issue, especially when you combine that with low self-esteem, then it facilitates real mental health issues. But this phenomenon can be triggered as simply as putting your hand underneath a desk and then trying to estimate the proportions of your hand. If you actually map it out, you'll realize you've mapped out a boxing glove, essentially. So anyway, I hope I really have established that body dysmorphia is something universal. It's not just for clinical samples, it's not just for the psychiatrist chair, it's something which we should all consider and take notice of. But because I'm studying psychology, and I found it quite cathartic at the time to really try and understand what was happening to me. So I started looking into body dysmorphia in the brain, and I was really disappointed. There's not a whole lot of research out there. I mean, what little research there is out there suggests that perhaps there may be a link between body dysmorphia and OCD. The brain structures involved in OCD seem to be implicated in body dysmorphia, and that does kind of make sense if you think about it, because of the obsessive nature of the fixation in body dysmorphia, and also the compulsions that will be enacted to compensate for this fixation. So that does kind of make sense. And then also they think perhaps the serotonin system might be involved, but then again, the serotonin system being, the happy chemical. But the problem with that is serotonin seems to be involved in everything, so I could probably say loneliness has something to do with serotonin, or the fact I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning has something to do with serotonin, and it just didn't make me feel it didn't feel adequate enough for me. So much more research needs to be done, and I thought, why not make up a theory of my own, because I've got nothing better to do, except a degree. Why am I here? I've got finals. Anyway, so my theory goes like this. I think that the old adage, seeing is believing, is a little bit outdated. I think that we don't give enough credence to how belief can have a very real effect on our perception and what we see in the physical world around us. Just as a depressive only sees negativity, will only have an attentional system that directs him to the most negative interpretation of an event, so too, perhaps, can someone who has a negative view of their body or a particular aspect of themselves have an attentional system that just distorts and directs attention straight there. And I think one thing that really captivated me in my studies was this dichotomy between something called mental imagery, which is imagination or belief, and perception. Now, these two things are very different because perception is this data-driven, it's like retina to brain. It's very energy-intensive. It's the most energy-intensive thing that we do. And then mental imagery sort of piggybacks on top of the same brain structures as perception. And so I wondered, what if maybe in cases of perceptual breakdown, when there's high load, for example, so that could be, in the cases that I've provided earlier, it could be something like malnutrition or not giving yourself enough caloric intake or even overexercise. What are these things could cause ambiguity in perception or even break it down entirely? Then maybe belief or mental imagery compensates. And so it shows us what we believe. Isn't that an incredible sort of idea that maybe belief is filling in the gaps of what we see? In the same way that when you're walking down a street at night and you believe, because you're threatened and you're walking down the street at night and you're by yourself and you're threatened and you're worried about it and you believe, oh God, there's a man in the corner, that's definitely a man. And that man will look to you as real as you or I, and then you get closer, and on closer inspection, it's definitely a bush. But at that time, your perception is telling you, oh my God, there's a threat. And so you see, it's an interesting theory. I do understand it's highly speculative, and I haven't even gotten like my degree back yet. I don't know what I'm going to get, so who knows, right? But either way, it's something to think about. So the point I'm trying to make is this field is wide open for research. And I think because I've pointed out just how universal body dysmorphia is, it's something we should really be paying more attention to. And I'd just like to conclude by saying society has never been more tied up in its own reflection, a reflection which I've just proven doesn't even reflect the truth anyway. Why is it that we can't stop describing little girls as pretty and little boys as strong? Don't you see that that's just going to set them up for an expectation of disappointment, which will only lead to and facilitate great unhappiness? Can we not value the content of our character rather than the content of the mirror? That's something that I'm afraid I'm just going to have to see to believe. Thank you very much.